3 lives, 3 worlds, Lotus steps. Wherever step goes, Lotus blooms. Divine prayer. Lotus Step Chapter 26, Book 2. It snows a lot this winter and rains infrequently. This was the first night rain Tianbu encountered after returning to Pinyin City with His Highness the Third Prince. The long night of snow has its own quiet beauty, but the rain on winter nights is pattering and making the ground cold. But it doesn't matter whether it is beautiful or not, it just makes people feel worried. Tianbu was waiting outside, looking in through the brown crystal curtain, and saw His Highness sitting next to a curved table with 7 or 8 empty wine bottles arranged horizontally and vertically. Tianbu couldn't help but feel even more worried. This morning, as usual, His Highness the Third Prince led Princess Yanlan to Xiajianding building for tea. While the Third Highness came downstairs for something, Yanlan talked to her for a while. Yanlan asked her, "These days, has His Highness the Third Highness ever mentioned Princess Hongyu again in private?" Tianbu naturally shook his head. Yanlan was a little happy, but maybe she also knew that joy was inappropriate at this time. She pursed her lips and flattened the slightly hooked corners of her mouth. After thinking about it carefully, she tentatively said to her, "I first saw the painting of Ruby by Your Highness. Painting, I also thought that His Highness might be interested in Hongyu. But now that His Highness has returned to the capital, he knows that Hongyu has gone to a distant country to marry, but there is no reaction. It shows that I was thinking wrong before." "No matter what Hongyu thinks of His Highness," said here, the voice was slightly mocking, "but His Highness has no thoughts about her. In the past, we were just passing time with her, are you right?" Tianbu has served Liansong since she was a child, and she can be used by the picky and difficult Third Highness for 20,000 years, which shows that she is not an ordinary immortal. She knows how to advance and retreat, and knows how to measure. The Chonglin immortal Guan can overwhelm Tianbu. Such Tianbu naturally understood Yanlan's little tricks and tests, so he just smiled gently. "The princess asked me what Your Highness is thinking. I don't dare to speculate on Your Highness's thoughts." Yanlan was a little disappointed when she didn't get the assurance from her that Lian San had no intention of marrying Chengyu. After a moment of silence, he whispered to himself, "Wunua is a bitter and cold place. The princesses who went there earlier to marry are all beautiful." He died young and embarked on the journey to the west, basically giving up half his life. Hongyu went west. If His Highness wanted to get her back, he would have found a way. If Chang'e body locked the demon tower to death, Your Highness, even if she loses half of her cultivation, she still has to save her life. But now, Hongyu is allowed to get married, which shows that Hongyu still can't compare with Chang'e. After saying this, she thought for a while and probably felt his analysis made sense, and his complexion improved again. But is that really the case? Tianbu, who was currently standing outside guarding the drunken Third Highness, didn't think so. She didn't lie to Yanlan. In private, Lian San had indeed never mentioned Chengyu. When she first returned to Pinyin City, she even thought that the difference in how the Third Highness treated the princess in the past was all her imagination. But half a month ago, by chance, she discovered that since returning to Beijing, His Highness could not sleep peacefully every night. Almost every night, he sat in his room until dawn. Of course, she couldn't be sure that His Highness's sleepless nights must be because of Chenyu, but if it wasn't for Chenyu, she couldn't think of anyone else he could be doing it for. During the sleepless night, His Highness the Third Highness did not take the initiative to ask for wine. Tianbu sent the wine on his own initiative. Wine can relieve worries. Her original intention was to hope that the Third Highness could relieve his worries with wine. After his worries were relieved, he could fall asleep. But who knew that as soon as he opened the door to drinking, His Highness got out of control and drank 10 bottles of wine every night until he was very drunk. He would not sleep even when he was drunk. Instead, he would go out and not let anyone follow him. Tianbu didn't know where His Highness went every night, but he guessed it wasn't far because he could always come back early the next morning. It seemed that when the sun rose, he would be normal again, and he would be the indifferent and distant Third Highness again, who seemed not to take Chengyu's Li Jing seriously. Midnight has passed. Tianbu glanced at the room again and saw 2 more empty wine bottles on the table. He thought it was almost time. The next moment, he saw His Highness the Third Prince lifting the curtain and coming out. Tianbu quickly handed over the oil paper umbrella in his hand. "Your Highness, please bring an umbrella. It will rain tonight, and I might get wet on you." His Highness the Third Prince didn't seem to hear her. He didn't take the umbrella and just walked past her. Tianbu tried to follow and pass the umbrella again, but he clearly heard His Highness the Third Prince say coldly, "You're not allowed to follow." Tianbu stood under the eaves of the corridor holding an umbrella, looking at the back of His Highness the Third Prince as he walked into the rain, and let out a long sigh. 5 updates. Lian San woke up from his sleep and heard the sound of cold rain outside the window. The room was dark, and he was confused in the darkness for a while. He raised his hand slightly, and light came on in the room. The pear mirror on the dressing table, the green lamp and jade screen, and the hibiscus-embroidered tent are all eye-catching. It is a woman's boudoir. Qingyu's boudoir in Shihua Tower. Here he is again. His Highness the Third Highness was lost for a moment. There is no way for a drunk person to deceive himself. No matter how much he suppresses himself during the day, once night falls and everything is silent, all the thoughts about Chengyu will be invisible. Ever since he woke up on her embroidered bed in the Shihua building after being drunk the first night, he understood one thing. He actually liked her much more than he thought. Otherwise, how could he, who had insomnia every night, just can you get a moment of sleep while lying on her embroidered bed in Shihua Tower? But so what? He has explored her soul many times and has come to the same conclusion. She is just a mortal. Just because of his love for her, is he going to lure a mortal to fall in love with him and then let both of them embark on a path of eternal destruction? He cannot. It's not that I don't dare, I don't want to, or don't want to. It's that I can't. Just let her be a mortal. Being a mortal who reincarnates from generation to generation will certainly bring with it all kinds of hardships, but compared to the pain and suffering she has to endure when falling in love with an immortal, the hardships she endures for a mortal are really nothing. Just pretend they have never met. The Third Highness sat up slowly, rubbed his forehead, and felt that it was time to leave. However, the moment he stood up, a dream he had just happened to have in his sleep suddenly passed through his mind. He stopped again. In fact, it is a dream with no logic and no reason. In the dream, he and Chengyu did not have such trouble. She is still very dependent on him. After the defeat of the Northern Guard and his army returned to the court, he immediately came to Shiwalu to see her, but the maid took him to her boudoir for some unknown reason. He stood in front of her embroidery bed and waited for her, just as he stood here. At that time, he was standing here, and soon he heard her footsteps, which landed on the wooden floor, like a deer running lightly in the mountains. Then, the door was pushed open, and she stood tall and tall at the door. She must have run in a hurry and was still breathing lightly. He looked into her eyes and saw that stars seemed to have fallen in her eyes. The next moment, she had jumped into his arms, like a little tiger. Unprepared, he was pushed back 2 steps by her and sat on the edge of the embroidery bed. She didn't feel embarrassed at all. Instead, she chuckled twice. Then, she stopped laughing, wrapped her arms around his neck lovingly, buried her head on his right shoulder, and said to him coquettishly in a soft voice, "Brother Lian-san, why have you been gone for so long, and there is no letter? When I came back, I stayed in the palace because I was worried, just to get some news about you from the royal brother. Living in the palace is really boring, and I miss you so much." The words were childish, but every word was full of nostalgia, making his heart soften. He replied to her softly, "It's my fault. Next time I travel far away, I will write to you every day." But even if he promised like this, she was not satisfied. She moved a little away from him, stood up straight, looked down at him, and pursed her lips unhappily. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. "What's wrong?" She raised her chin slightly, probably to make an arrogant gesture, but she wanted to see his face, so she lowered her eyelashes. "The expression is contradictory, but it looks very cute." She complained, I already told you that I miss you so much. Why didn't you reply that you miss me too? She frowned suspiciously. Does it mean that even the third brother has been out for so long and yet he doesn't miss me at all? San Diao, Kafengio. He was amused by her and pinched her nose. What do you think? She said seriously, you have to tell me. She urged him delicately, hurry up and tell me. Well, I miss Au very much. He answered her. She was somewhat satisfied, and the corners of her lips curled up. Then we are very close, right? Of course he nodded. Yeah. She was finally completely satisfied and became happy again. She hugged his neck again and rubbed his face lovingly. Then, since we are such good friends, I want to tell you a secret. Secret? Her head was still resting on his right shoulder, her lips pressed against his right ear, and her orchid breath made his ear hot. That night, Brother Lian-san kissed me in the hot spring pool. Was it because he liked me? A soft voice sounded in his ears, and his whole body froze immediately. But she was as soft as a vine or a trickle, clinging closer and closer to his body. Her voice became lower and softer, almost breathy, and she teased his ear. I also like Brother Lian-san. I like him very much. At that moment, fireworks seemed to explode in his mind. He couldn't control his strength and hugged her tightly. What did you say? She did not struggle, laughed softly, and whispered in his ear again. I said I like Brother Lian-san and want to be your bride. Her voice was innocent and naughty, and her words were full of temptation. Ew. He was silent for a long time before replying to her with difficulty. You can't joke about this kind of thing. He tried his best to control his emotions at that moment and let her go a little, trying to see her clearly. Expression to figure out whether she is serious or just teasing. That's when he woke up. A simple dream. The last fig leaf was torn off, and what was covered under it was his love and desire for her, and his truest desire for her deep in his heart. Intellectually, he knew very well that it was best for her never to fall in love with him. But when he was drunk, in his dreams, in these wild moments when his mind was gone, he never stopped longing for her to like him and fall in love with him. He has an extremely secret desire for her, and he longs for her to be entangled with him forever, even if it is doomed. The arrogant water god has always been very self-centered. He always gets what he wants and always gets it. He has never tried to suppress or restrain what he wants in this way. He couldn't think about her anymore, otherwise, he didn't know how long his sanity could hold on. The rain stopped. The morning star is in sight. The Imperial Master stood on the 9th floor of Shirhua Tower and solemnly knocked on the door in front of him. After a while, there was movement in the room, and the door creaked open, revealing the tall figure of a young man in white. The Imperial Master was confused. Your Highness, Third Prince? Lian-san looked at the Imperial Master, who was covered in cold air, and frowned inconspicuously. What are you doing here? The Imperial Master was surprised for a moment and did not bother to wonder why Lian-san was here. He took a step forward and said urgently, Your Highness, the princess is missing. The Third Highness was stunned for a moment, and then, as if he didn't hear clearly, he raised his eyebrows and asked, What did you say? The news of Cheng-Yu's disappearance reached the palace at night. At the end of the Su period, an urgent memorandum of 800 miles from the governor of Ji County was presented to the emperor's desk. The memorial report stated that there was a sudden flood in the Jianghui desert half a month ago, and the thousands of miles of desert was covered by the flood overnight. When the sand flood came, the princess and her party had been out of Diamugwan for 6 days and should be heading into the desert. After the flood retreated, the governor of Ji County immediately sent people into the desert to search for the princess, but found nothing. The princess was missing. When the emperor heard the news, his face paled. He immediately summoned the imperial advisor to the palace and asked the imperial advisor to perform hexagrams to determine the good or bad fortune of the jade. The imperial master was also shocked when he heard the news and immediately used copper coins to make a hexagram. Unexpectedly, the hexagram was very bad, but fortunately there was a glimmer of hope among the bad signs. The Imperial Master tried his best to meditate for a whole hour, and then concluded that this hexagram probably meant that Chengyu had been rescued by others at this time, and there should be no danger to his life. What hung in the balance was the next journey to the west. The road must be full of dangers, and from time to time there will be bloody disasters and life-threatening injuries. Only by the help of noble people can we ensure safety, otherwise it will be a matter of uncertainty whether we can walk or not and get Wunuosu. When the Imperial Master read this hexagram, he suddenly realized that the matter was serious and did not dare to stay in the palace for a long time. He comforted the Emperor with a few words and hurried out to find Liansan. He braved the night rain and searched for His Highness the Third Prince for half a night, but found nothing. He was exhausted and was about to return home. When the wind passed over Pingan City, he suddenly saw a light on in the Shirhua Tower. The Imperial Master was excited, thinking that Li Xiang, the little magic flower in the building, had rescued Chengyu and brought her back to the capital. He flew down excitedly to check. Unexpectedly, when the door opened, the princess was not there. He looked for her. One night, His Highness the Third Prince stood behind the door. The Imperial Master and Liansan stood at the door, one outside and one inside. The Imperial Master finished the story of the princess's disappearance in a few words and then detailed the hexagram he gave Chengyu. As he spoke, he observed Liansan's expression and saw that His Highness lowered his eyes slightly, but was listening to him carefully, but the expression on his face remained indifferent. The Imperial Master pondered over the reaction of His Highness the Third Highness, and he knew this expression in his heart, but because of his little friendship with Chengyu, he still bit the bullet and tried it, since the hexagram says, "The princess needs to be protected by nobles. Only in this way can we arrive at Wunuosa safely, and this noble man is extraordinary." I thought that this noble man seemed to be referring to His Highness the Third. Since the princess is destined to have such a noble man as His Highness, then His Highness even intervenes to help a group of princesses. It can't be considered as messing up her fate. His Highness was silent for a long time. "Her nobleman is not me." After a long time, he finally spoke, and with a wave of his hand, a cloud of mist appeared in the air. The Imperial Master looked at Liansan without knowing why. The Third Prince raised his head slightly and looked at the fog. Under the shadow tracing technique, where she is at this time should be clearly visible here, but at this time there's a cloud of fog in front of you and me. There must be someone there. He rescued her from the flow of sand and used magic to hide her traces. He paused and said in an incomprehensible tone, "If she is destined to have a noble person, that person will be her noble person. The person who can hide the traces of the princess under the eyes of His Highness must be someone with extraordinary magical power." The Imperial Master suddenly remembered someone. "Your Highness is talking about." His Highness the Third Prince was still looking at the mist. "Yes, I'm talking about him, Di Zhaoxi." The Imperial Preceptor murmured, "So, it was Emperor Zhaoxi who saved the princess during the sandstorm half a month ago." At this point, the Imperial Preceptor suddenly remembered Zhaoxi's obsession with Chengyu and couldn't help but feel horrified. But according to Di Zhaoxi's thoughts and possessiveness towards the princess, if he saves the princess, is it possible for him to send her to Wunuosu to marry Prince Minda? The more the Imperial Master thought about it, the more frightened he became. If he were still Ji Mingfeng, for the sake of peace in the world, he would naturally not kidnap the princess who married him. But now he is the master of the people. Looking at his evil temper, maybe he will not take this person away from this world. Taking into account the rise and fall of the princess and the fate of the family and the country, once his thoughts were let loose, the Imperial Master could not hold back. The most fearful thing is that although he saved the princess, he ignored her wishes and kidnapped her or imprisoned her. He killed her. Yes, this is too possible, otherwise why would he use magic to hide the traces of the princess so that we can find her nowhere? The Imperial Preceptor was extremely worried. "Your Highness," you said. But before he could finish speaking, His Highness interrupted him. "That's enough." The Imperial Master closed his mouth and watched helplessly as Liansan turned around to collect the mist in the air. At that moment, the lantern in the glazed lamp bowl exploded with a loud sound. His Highness picked up the scissors and leaned over to cut the lantern. The Imperial Master couldn't figure it out. Since Lien San was so ruthless and Cheng Yu seemed to have nothing to do with him whether he was dead or alive, why would he come to Shihua Tower again tonight? These days, His Highness the Third Highness has always been cold and has a bad temper. The Imperial Master didn't want to get into trouble with him, but at this moment he couldn't hold it back and sighed. Of course I know that even if the princess is betrayed by Zhao Shi, being imprisoned is also her fate, but I can't bear it selfishly. Your Highness is unwilling to help, which is actually the right thing to do. But I have some doubts. Since Your Highness has no mercy for the princess, why does he still appear here tonight? Where are you in this building? This was actually a bit disrespectful. After he blurted it out, the Imperial Master felt it was inappropriate. He knocked on his forehead and said angrily, I was confused tonight too. What I asked was just stupid words. Your Highness didn't take it for granted. Hear it. But the Third Highness responded to him, and he cut the wick slowly. I do still feel a little reluctant to let her go. It's just human nature. Is there any contradiction between this and my choice not to interfere with her destiny? It's true that I can't let go, but there are just some things that I can't let go of. The Imperial Master understood this and didn't know what to say for a moment. He was looking for Lien San everywhere tonight, with only one purpose in mind, which was to tell him Cheng Yu's fortune divination and to ask him for advice on whether to help a bunch of Cheng Yu. Now that His Highness has expressed his attitude, his matter is settled and he can return. Although the rain had stopped, the wind was still miserable. The Imperial Master sneezed and was about to say goodbye and leave, but suddenly someone jumped out from behind him. He passed by his side like lightning and knelt down into the inner room with a plop. The woman's mournful voice echoed with the miserable wind outside the window. Since the princess is in such hardship, please beg the Imperial Preceptor and the General to save our princess. The Imperial Master looked at the woman kneeling on the ground with wide eyes. Flower Lady? The visitor is none other than Hua Feiwu. Although there is a cold wind and rain tonight, it cannot stop the brothel from doing business until Easter, when there will be a banquet in Linling Pavilion. Xiaohua couldn't sleep for a while. After tossing and turning, she carried the small package containing the residual scriptures and the sachet to Shihua Tower. Since she couldn't see Lien San, the scripture pages and the sachet had no use, and leaving them in Linling Pavilion would only make people sad, so she planned to return them tonight. When she appeared in the building, she met the Imperial Master who had just flown down. She instinctively hid around the corner. She didn't expect that Lien San was also in the princess's room, and she didn't expect that the Imperial Master actually brought such a gift. News. Xiaohua touched her head to the ground and knelt down. Her posture of asking for help was very pious. This little flower demon was so loyal, which made the Imperial Master feel respected. He couldn't help but step forward to remind her and persuade her. It's not that we don't want to save the princess, you are also a flower demon. You should know that mortals have their destiny, so you rashly disturbed her. I'm afraid there will be trouble later. But the Imperial Master actually overestimated Hua Feiwu. Xiaohua really didn't know this and raised her head in confusion. When the Imperial Master saw Xiaohua acting like this, he understood. While he was wondering about Xiaohua, a flower demon, who didn't even understand how she grew up so big, he sighed and said something heartfelt. Let a poor Taoist help the princess. This is very simple, but the poor Taoist helped the princess. Dao is not a noble person of the princess, and he has rashly interfered with her destiny. I really can't predict, control, or bear the consequences of the consequences, so I might as well let the princess live her life. The little flower frowned in thought, and the Imperial Master was actually a little suspicious. This flower girl seemed confused and not smart at first glance. Could it be that that pretty little head could really think of something useful? The flower lady glanced at herself, then at the Third Highness, who turned around, and then fixed her gaze on the Third Highness. Before, I thought that the general was just a general of the imperial court. But tonight I heard that the Imperial Master, after talking to the general, I realized that the general is not a man of this world. Even the master of the state respects the general. So I guess that the consequences of interfering with the fate of the princess are unbearable by the state advisor, but the general should be able to bear it. Right? The imperial master was astonished that this silly lady actually caught Hua Dian by mistake. It was indeed true. Even if Tianjuan's youngest son violated the laws of heaven, the criminal division would probably be accommodating and agree with him. These people who realize the Tao in white are naturally different. The cold wind poured in from the door, blowing the candle in the glass lamp bowl and shaking it. Lian San found a matching lampshade, protected the candlelight under the lampshade, and then sat down at the table. Fong looked at Hua Feiwu, who was still kneeling on the ground. The imperial master is exaggerating, he frowned. Eyebrow, Di Zhaoxi's character is not that bad. With him in AU. He paused, bypassed the name, and changed his words. With him by her side, she will be safe and sound, and there is no need for me to interfere. These reassuring words did not comfort Hua Feiwu. Xiaohua frowned, but I don't believe him. I only believe in the general. Lian San smiled, a bit impatiently. You don't believe him, but you believe me, but there's actually no difference between him and me. There was a little sarcasm in his voice that was not easy for others to detect. It was rare that Xiaohua actually heard the sarcasm and hurriedly argued, of course you are different from him. I believe in the general because the princess likes the general. The general is the only person the princess loves. The princess trusts the general. Naturally, I also trust the general. As soon as the words fell to the ground, there was a dead silence in the room. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the sound of dripping water seemed to be frozen by the ice and suddenly stopped at this moment. After a long time, Lian San's voice rang out in the dead silence. Are you kidding? The cold smile on his face disappeared, and his eyebrows were frowned, so his eyebrows looked a little gloomy, but his eyes were, but it was not harsh, but rather doubtful and helpless. Xiaohua Zhenxing, I'm not kidding. By the way, there's this. She hurriedly opened the small package at hand and took out 2 pages of residual scriptures and a sachet. This is the princess when General Yu left the Northern Guard a while ago. Using the blood of her fingers as ink, she copied the scriptures to pray for you, and this is the sachet she made specially for you. Xiaohua suddenly remembered and took out a small mirror from her sleeve and said hurriedly, Yes. Yes, and also, before the princess left the capital, I couldn't bear to leave her, so every time I saw her, I kept the scenes of getting along with her in this small mirror. The princess likes you, she said it herself. If the general doesn't believe it, you'll know with your own eyes. The silver light suddenly appeared in the small mirror and was projected into the air. As the silver light faded, a picture emerged in the air. Xiaohua whispered, This is the princess's last night in Pingan City. The 16th night of the 12th lunar month was Chengyu's last night in Pingan City. The moon at night is like an ice wheel, a round one, half hanging in the sky. Because Chenyu was leaving Beijing the next day, Hua Feiwu was really reluctant to leave, so he braved the cold and came to Shiwalu late at night, hoping to see her again. Xiaohua found Chenyu on the roof of the 10th floor of Shihua building. Chenyu was wrapped in a fur cloak, sitting cross-legged on the ridge of the roof, holding a wine bottle and drinking wine. There was a small charcoal stove at his feet, which Li Xiang probably left there because he was worried about being sent away. Although the snow had stopped for a few days, the old snow had accumulated so thickly that it had only melted into the fur. It was still freezing cold outside, and a small charcoal stove was actually of little use. Xiaohua was worried that Chenyu would be frozen, so the first thing she said when she stepped forward was to persuade her to go down. Chang Yu glanced at Xiaohua with drunken eyes, but his voice was very sober. Don't worry, I'm just coming up to take one last look at the city. He seemed slightly melancholy. After all, I have lived here for 16 years. Thinking about it, I'm actually a little reluctant to part with it. Qingyu only climbs high when she is drunk. Xiaohua found her on the roof. She originally thought she must be drunk, but now she was a little unsure when she spoke so clearly. At the same time, the emotional Xiaohua was made sad by Cheng Yu's 2 words. After thinking for a moment, She volunteered. "If you miss your homeland in the future, just call me and I will take you back to visit relatives." Chang Yu smiled, then lowered his eyes after laughing for a while, and suppressed the smile. "No, if you practice diligently and travel thousands of miles every day, then occasionally bring Xiaoqi and Xiaoli to Wunuosu to see them. That's all I need." She sighed softly. "In this safe city, there are actually not many people I miss." As she said this, she was playing with something in the hand that was not carrying the wine bottle. Tonight, every sentence Cheng Yu spoke was calm and gentle, but every sentence was sad. Zayawasi was a little stupid, but her emotional intelligence was still good. She didn't want to appear sad and add to her sorrow, so she changed the subject and looked at Cheng Yu's hand, pretending to be relaxed. "Hey, is that a sachet in your hand?" The question made Cheng Yu startled for a moment, and he unconsciously let go of his left hand, as if he didn't know what he was unconsciously playing with in his hand, and glanced down. Xiaohua then saw clearly that it was indeed a sachet, with lotus-colored brocade as the base and 1,000-petal lotus embroidered with 5-color silk thread. The name of this lotus is true. The petals are complicated and difficult to embroider. However, the lotus on the sachet has double petals, and the color of the white petals and pink edges seems to be smudged, vivid before the eyes. It is a jade at a glance. Handwriting. Xihua's heart moved, and she blurted out, "This sachet is probably not embroidered for personal use, right?" Chang Yu's expression suddenly froze, and he didn't answer for a moment. Xiahua stared for a moment, then noticed a few pages of scriptures scattered at the foot of the charcoal stove. She picked them up and looked at them, and said in surprise, "This is the blood menstruation." Xiahua took out a bright pearl, and with the light of the pearl, carefully read, he flipped through the broken pages in his hand and murmured, "This word, you copied it too." Xiahua suddenly realized, stopped talking, raised her eyes to look at Cheng Yu, but finally couldn't hold back. This, why do some of them look like they have been burned?" Cheng Yu lowered his eyes for a while, then raised his eyes and smiled with an unknown meaning, and held the sachet again. "It's nothing, I was going to burn them originally, but I forgot about it while drinking." Xiahua didn't react yet. "Come here." She has thrown the sachet into the charcoal stove. Although Xihua's mind was slow, her hands were very fast, and she rescued the sachet from the silver bone charcoal that was burning with scattered sparks. Xiahua patted the small burnt spot on the sachet that was licked by the sparks, with a distressed look on her face. "If I guessed correctly, this sachet was specially made for General Lian, and this blood sutra was specially copied for him to pray for. Are you safe?" Hearing Xihua's words, Cheng Yu was a little startled. After a while, he seemed to react, and his expression turned cold. "Yes or no? What's the point?" "Xiaohuanana, you can see that it's something that has been made with care. Don't you think it's a pity to burn it like this?" It seemed that Xihua's words were ridiculous, and a cold smile appeared on Cheng Yu's lips. "What's the pity?" she said softly. Looking at the broken scriptures in Xiaohua's arms and the sachet in her hand, on the contrary, their existence makes me look ridiculous and ridiculous. Shouldn't such things be burned? Xiahua disagreed in her heart and couldn't help but test. "I always feel that there is some misunderstanding between you and General Lian." Xiahua believed in her own logic because, "According to what you told me before, General, didn't he kiss you before? Then he must." Chang Yu interrupted her. "He just got interested in sex." "How humiliating is it to get interested in sex?" When she said this, as if she couldn't bear the humiliation, she raised her right hand and took a few more sips of wine. Xiahua looked at Cheng Yu's cold face and didn't know what to say. For the first time in her life, she felt that she was clumsy in speaking. At this time, it seems that nothing can or should be said. She sighed. But Xiahua is indeed a talent. When she sighs, she can hide the remaining scriptures and the sachet in her sleeves while Cheng Yu is not paying attention. In fact, she didn't know why she wanted to hide them. She hid them instinctively. The third watch has passed, and even the moonlight is freezing on this silvery night. After the last drop of wine in the jug entered his mouth, Cheng Yu placed the empty jug at his feet and sat there calmly looking into the distance for a while. When Xiaohua once again plucked up the courage to persuade Qingyu to leave, she saw Qingyu sitting quietly crying without warning. 2 tears rolled down from the corners of her eyes, quickly slid down her cheeks, and fell into her clothes, leaving only 2 thin traces of water on her face. Qingyu doesn't like to cry. Xiaohua has never seen Qingyu cry in the past few years. Even though the girl was very worried during this period of frustration, she seemed to be calm, which made Xiaohua feel that even hurting her 3 times was not serious. At this time, she saw Qingyu crying. Xiaohua was so shocked that she couldn't help but murmured, "Princess." Qingyu didn't seem to know that he was crying, and said softly, "Give the sachet to your lover, and give the shoes and hats to your brother. At that time, he must ask me to embroider a sachet for him." I didn't understand at that time, I just thought he was teasing me. He played with me. Later I thought I understood what he meant, and wondered if he wanted to be my lover. I happily embroidered the sachet, thinking while embroidering, I will give it to him when he returns to court after winning the victory. Give it to him, what a surprise he will be. She paused, with tears still on her face, but a smile appeared on the corner of her lips, and the smile seemed particularly self-deprecating. It turns out that everything was just my own fault. He was really just teasing me from beginning to end. When Xiaohua heard this, she felt heartbroken, but she didn't know how to comfort her. When she saw Qingyu turning aside to get the wine, she hurriedly advised, although wine is considered a good thing, it is not advisable to drink too much. However, Xiaohua, this person, was heartbroken. So soft, her voice also became soft, and her soft advice was not heard by Qingyu at all. Qingyu opened another pot of wine and drank half of it. He stared blankly into the distance again, and for a long time, he put the hand holding the pot on his forehead. She closed her eyes and murmured a little tiredly, "He made me understand what it was like to like someone, and how happy it would be, but he took those things back so quickly. He lied to me." She spoke softly to the only audience in front of her, "Xiaohua, what's so good about liking someone? I wish I never understood." Xiaohua felt choked and finally came up with a comforting word, "If you are so sad, then you might as well forget it." Qingyu was quiet for a long time, then nodded slightly, "Yes. It's getting late." She stood up unsteadily. His voice was still clear, as if he was not drunk. But then Xiaohua realized that Qingyu was really drunk. That's why she cried in front of her and said those words. She quickly stood up and wanted to help Qingyu, but she pushed him away. The moonlight was desolate and cold, and so was the night. Qingyu was walking unsteadily on the ridge of the roof, his back silhouette lonely and quiet, with a hint of ominous sadness. The picture in the Linghua mirror disappeared at this time. The imperial master had been paying attention to Liansan, and seeing His Highness who had been calm tonight, when Chengyu's figure appeared in the scene projected by the caltrip mirror, cracks finally appeared in the indifferent and perfect expression. And when Chengyu threw the sachet and her hand into the charcoal stove without hesitation and said self-deprecatingly that their existence made her look ridiculous and ridiculous, His Highness's face turned pale little by little. The Imperial Master was surprised and puzzled by the reaction of His Highness III. He couldn't understand why His Highness the Third Highness, who was so indifferent to the news of the princess's marriage and disappearance after hearing the news, saw Changyu's profile and heard her admitting her love for him half-understandably. "If you like it, you will be so shocked." Of course he didn't understand. As far as Lian San is concerned, all rational arrangements, sober decisions, as well as the alienation and so-called clean break based on this are all based on Changyu not liking him. He never thought that Changyu had feelings for him and that she liked him. She liked him, but what did he do to her? In fact, he should have noticed it as early as that night when she went to the Imperial Master's mansion and asked him persistently across the mirror pond whether he had had many beauties in the past. Otherwise, why would she care about whether he had had women in the past? But how did he answer her? He said yes without any explanation. And when she asked him in a trembling voice if she was also a pastime, in order to make her give up, he actually didn't deny it. After that, he made the decision to break up with her and let her marry far away without paying attention or caring about her. Tonight, the Imperial Master came to inform him of the news about her disappearance. He even thought he was objective and calm and pushed her to Dijiaoshi. The already precarious thread of reason in his mind was completely severed with a snap. His body was shaking slightly, and he couldn't control it, so he couldn't help but hold on to the corner of the table. While shedding tears, she said to Hua Feiwu, "What's so good about liking someone? I wish I never understood." A thin line of tears hung at the end of her crimson eyes, flying out and twisting into an invisible thread, tightly strangling his heart, causing him uncontrollable pain. What's so good about liking someone? I wish I never understood. Her drunken cries were sad but calm, but he could hear the smell of blood and tears in her calm voice. The sound of crying blood, word by word, was tearing out his heart. The Imperial Master saw His Highness with a pale face and said nothing. He turned around and stepped out of the door. When he stepped out of the threshold, he stumbled unsteadily and held on to the door frame to prevent him from falling. The Imperial Master called worriedly from behind, "Your Highness." There was no sign of His Highness outside the door. End of Lotus Step Chapter 26, Book 2. By Tangqi English translated using Google.